So good morning, my dears, and today on this wonderful sunny day we start our tour, and we're going to have a boat tour for about 1 hour, and I hope it will be really enjoyable for you to see our beautiful city, St. Petersburg, from water. St. Petersburg is usually called the Northern Venice. And our city is really similar to Venice. We have lots of canals here, and St. Petersburg is situated on islands, 42 islands in St. Petersburg, and 68 rivers and canals crisscross the city in different places. And now we are on the winter channel. The winter channel is the only artificial channel in St. Petersburg. We have lots of natural canals and rivers, but this is the only artificial one, and it connects Moika River and the Neva River, which is the main waterway of St. Petersburg. And there are lots of bridges in the city, and we usually say that St. Petersburg is the capital of bridges. There are 350 bridges in St. Petersburg, and bridges are very low, and when the tide is really high, so it's really dangerous to stand up while you're on the boat. So you have to sit quietly and enjoy the atmosphere. To the left-hand side, we see the building of the Hermitage Museum. The Hermitage is a huge complex. It consists of 5 buildings. And to the left, there is a new Hermitage. It's one of the buildings of this museum. And to the right-hand side, there is a Hermitage Theater. And it's green, but there are 2 windows that look different, and the wall around those windows is yellow. It looks like a patch on the green building, and those 2 windows that look so different from the other building reminds us of the time when there was a winter palace of Peter the Great on that very place. But now there is a Hermitage Theater there. And here you can see the Neva River. And this is the widest part of the Neva River. It's so-called delta of the Neva River. And the view here is absolutely fantastic. From here you can see the golden spire of Peter and Paul Cathedral, which is right in the middle of the Peter and Paul Fortress. And Peter and Paul Fortress is like the heart of St. Petersburg. And it started with a fortress, our city. And Peter and Paul Cathedral, which is in the center of the fortress, is the burial place of Russian Tsars, starting from Peter the Great and ending up with the family of Nicholas II, the last Russian emperor. Nearby the walls of the fortress there is a beach, and on that beach they usually have some festivals, some shows, and right now they also have some kind of a festival of sand sculptures just over there. And on a nice sunny day, people come to the beach of the Peter and Paul Fortress, and they love sunbathing here, but nobody swims in the Neva River. First of all, the current is really high, and it's quite dangerous to swim in this part of the Neva River, and also it's a little bit dirty. And the Neva is pretty long, it's 74 kilometers long. The Neva River starts in the Ladoga Lake. Remember the name, the Ladoga Lake. It's the second largest lake after the Lake Baikal. And lots of rivers get into the Ladoga Lake, but only one river gets out from the Ladoga, it's the Neva River. And the Neva River goes through the city and then gets into the Finland, the Gulf of Finland, which is the part of the Baltic Sea. And the Neva River is the main waterway of St. Petersburg. And on this very place, I would say that our city reminds a little bit of Grand Canal in Venice, but it's my personal opinion. And to the left-hand side, we see the Winter Palace. It's the oldest and the most beautiful part of the State Hermitage Museum. And the Winter Palace is the former residence of Russian Tsars, where they lived in winter time. In summer, they went to summer residences. The Winter Palace was built by the Italian architect Francesca Bartolomeo Rastrelli, especially for the daughter of Peter the Great, Elizabeth. The palace took 8 years, but unfortunately Elizabeth died and she didn't move into the palace. She never happened to become the hostess of the palace. After the death of Elizabeth, her nephew became the emperor, Peter III. And he and his wife, Catherine II, became the first owners of the Winter Palace. But after half a year, Peter III was overthrown, and his wife, Catherine the Great, happened to be the Empress of Russia, and she became the first hostess of the Winter Palace. And it was her idea to arrange a private court museum inside, and she gave a name to it, l'Ermitage, which is a French word. It means the place of solitude, where you can stay alone. And Catherine arranged a private museum only for her friends, her favorites, her court ladies. And we know from her diary, she kept a diary, and she mentioned only me and mine can admire my collection. She bought the collection of 224 paintings from a German merchant, Gatzkowski. It was the start of the collection, and the collection was growing pretty fast. And now the Hermitage has more than 3 million exhibits, because after the death of Catherine the Great, other emperors tried to add up this collection with paintings and sculptures. And now it's a public museum, it's open for people. To the left-hand side, we can see the golden spire of the Admiralty. And Admiralty, it's the first fortified shipyard. And the first ships were built here in the times of Peter the Great. And the Russian fleet was really famous at that time while Peter was ruling the country. He started building the fleet here in St. Petersburg, because St. Petersburg was the port, it was the river and the seaport. And right now Admiralty is not a fortified shipyard anymore, but the building is still here, and on the top of the golden spire there is a weather vane in the shape of a sailing boat. And it's like a landmark of St. Petersburg, like Eiffel Tower in Paris or Big Ben in London. And just in front you can see the St. Isaac's Cathedral. The golden dome of St. Isaac's Cathedral is even seen within 30 kilometers away from St. Petersburg, from Peterhof, because St. Isaac's Cathedral is really high, 102 meters high almost. And St. Isaac's Cathedral is one of the most beautiful churches in St. Petersburg. It was built in the 19th century. It took 40 years to build it. They started in 1818 and finished in 1858. It was designed by a French architect, Montferrand. And cathedral was built on piles. Thousands of piles were put before they started the construction of this cathedral. And it's decorated with bronze bas-reliefs and granite columns. And inside it's also absolutely marvelous. Right now it's partly a museum, partly a church. And to the to the left-hand side, on the opposite side from St. Isaac's Cathedral, we can see the university building. So this red and white building, it's the St. Petersburg State University. But originally this building was designed by Domenico Trezzini, and there were 12 ministries of Peter the Great here. It was like administrative center in the times of Peter. But in the beginning of the 19th century, it was turned into the university. It started with 3 faculties, but now it has more than 20. And this is the main building of the university now. Next to the red and white building of the university, there is a faculty of philology or philological department, this green and white building. And on the other side of the university, there is a yellow building with white columns. It's a classical building, classical architectural style, popular in the 19th century. It's the former Academy of Sciences. Later, the Academy of Sciences moved to Moscow. And next to the Academy of Sciences, we see a green and white building of Kunstkammer. Kunstkammer, it sounds very German, it's the name. It's a chamber of curiosities, as how it was called in the times of Peter. This is the first public museum. It was opened in 1714, especially for people. And people at that time in Russia didn't know why they should come to a museum. They had no idea what for. And Peter suggested that everybody who would get into the museum would be given a shot of vodka. So it was done to encourage people to come to museum. Maybe it's a true story, maybe it's a myth, but it's a funny myth. And right now this Kunstkammer is the Museum of Anthropology and History of Peoples of the World. So we're approaching the Palace Bridge. The Palace Bridge is built next to the Winter Palace, so this is why it's called the Palace Bridge. And this is one of the drawbridges of St. Petersburg. And several bridges over the Neva River are drawbridges. And at night, when the navigation starts in May and lasts till the end of October usually. And bridges get open at night for barges and boats and ships. It's pretty busy river at night. But also lots of touristy boats come here to see St. Petersburg at night and to see open bridges. It takes only several minutes to have the bridge open. And lots of people come to the embankment to see it, and it's really interesting. But other bridges get open at 2 in the morning, while this bridge, the Palace Bridge, gets open at 1:30. And to the left-hand side, we see the Spit of Basil Island. The Spit of Basil Island is artificially made. It divides the Neva River and another sleeve of the Neva River, so-called Small Neva River. And on the Spit of Basil Island, there are 2 rostral columns. Rostral columns were used as especially during the time when it was the port. And in the 19th century, it was still the port here. And they lit them up, those rostral columns, so they were seen for the boats and ships. Even in Pushkin's times, in Alexander Pushkin's times, this part of the city was the port. But later the port was put into another part of the city. And rostral columns were designed in a way like Romans did. In old times, Romans decorated their triumphal columns with prows of defeated boats. But here you can see that these are not prows of defeated boats. These are decorative parts of the boat, and these are decorative columns. And nowadays, on some special day, like the Victory Day, the 9th of May, our victory of the Germany during the World War II, or for example, the Fleet Day, the 2nd of August, or the birthday of St. Petersburg, which is celebrated usually the last Sunday of May. Those columns are lit up, and it looks really, really amazing, especially in the background of the blue sky or a gray sky. And to the left-hand side there is another bridge that connects the Basil Island, where the Spit of Basil Island is situated, with another island. And I'm just reminding you that in St. Petersburg we have 42 islands, but originally there were 100 islands when Peter the Great decided to build the city on this place. And later they connected some islands, and now we have only 42, but it's still many. And just nearby we see the brown boat. It looks like an ancient boat, but it's not. It's just an imitation of the ancient boat. It's called Flying Dutchman, and it's actually a fake boat. It can't move. It was designed as a restaurant, but which is really funny, inside, apart the restaurant, there is also a gym where people can come and work out. It's really funny. And it's still a restaurant and a gym. And we're approaching Kronversky small channel, and on the right hand side there is one of the smallest islands in St. Petersburg. It's so-called Hare Island or Rabbit Island. And they say there were lots of hares in that time when they started building the fortress here. Also, this the Finnish name of this island is Jaanisaari Island, because originally this part was a part of Finland, and later, and Finland was at that time under Sweden, and Peter started building the city during the course of the Northern War. This is very important fact in the Russian history, because St. Petersburg was built during the course of the Northern War that lasted for 21 years. It started in 1700 and was over in 1721. In 1703, Peter, it was on 16th of May, according to the old style, old calendar. So the first foundation stone was laid out in the middle of the Hare Island. And later the fortress was built here. The original fortress was built of sand and timber, and later it was rebuilt in brick and stone. And the fortress was built to protect St. Petersburg from enemies from Sweden. But as soon as Kronstadt, or Kronstadt, nowadays it's called Kronstadt, was built, and the fortresses were built there, and this fortress lost its military importance, and it was turned into a political prison. And the first prisoner of this fortress happened to be the son of Peter the Great, Alexei. He was the son with the first marriage of Peter, and it happened that poor guy was against Peter's reforms. He happened to be in the opposition to Peter's reforms, and Peter was quite a cruel guy. He was a very cruel man, and Alexei was put into the prison, and unfortunately he was killed here. He was tortured to death. And as I told you, the fortress was the political prison, and there were lots of famous prisoners of this fortress. For example, for a while, Fyodor Dostoevsky was imprisoned here, famous Russian writer. And another writer, Chernyshevsky, was also imprisoned here. And Lenin's brother, Vladimir's Lenin brother, Alexander Ulyanov, was also imprisoned in this fortress for his participation in assassination on Alexander III. And until 1924 it was the prison, but afterwards it was turned into museum. And nowadays people can come and see the fortress, can see Peter and Paul Cathedral, and also can see the political prison, the former political prison of Tsar's times. You see that the fortress has bastions. There are 6 bastions of the fortress, and each bastion has its name. One bastion is named after Peter the Great, and the other bastions are named after the names of Peter's associates and friends. And on this side, the fortress is built in brick. But on the other side, the brick walls are faced with granite. And we still don't know why. Probably, you know, the granite side was seen from the Winter Palace, so this is why it looks nicer. And on the other side, who cares? You know, it's just plain brick walls. This fortress happened to be the perfect example of fortification of the 18th century, but as I told you, it was never in use. And right in the middle of the fortress there is Peter and Paul Cathedral. And it was built in the first part of the 18th century by a very famous architect, Domenico Trezzini. And on the top of the golden spire, there is an angel holding a cross. And this Peter and Paul Cathedral is an active church, but for many years it was used for burying Tsars here. It happened to be the sepulchre of Russian Tsars. And next to it there is another church. It's a grand vault that was supposed to be the grand vault for Grand Dukes and Duchesses. And to the left-hand side, another red brick building. It's the former Kronwerk. It's in the shape of a crown, and this is where they kept weapons. But right now it's a museum of artillery, and you can see some missiles outside the artillery museum, and inside they have a Kalashnikov gun exhibition, for example. So it's pretty interesting museum, especially for men. And we are approaching now the first bridge of St. Petersburg. We've seen the Palace Bridge, we've seen very low bridges over the Winter Channel, but this wooden bridge, it's called St. John Bridge, and this bridge is the first one. And Peter the Great, when he was thinking about St. Petersburg, when the city was conceived, he didn't like to have bridges at all. He thought that it would destroy the atmosphere of the city on water, and he wanted people to use boats, like taxi boats, so from one island to another island. But Peter died in 1725, and they started building bridges, and maybe Peter would get unhappy if he would be able to see how many bridges we have nowadays, but now we have approximately 350 bridges. So you see lots of boats to the left-hand side. These are all touristy boats, and the navigation started in April this time of the year. The weather let us do that, and our city is very popular touristy destination. Lots of people from Russia, not only from foreign countries, come here, and lots of people from Moscow as well to enjoy the atmosphere of the northern Venice, St. Petersburg. So now we are under the St. John Bridge, so it's also pretty low. And I'm just telling you that this is the first bridge of St. Petersburg. So to the right hand side you can see some green grass nearby the walls of the fortress, and you see that people are enjoying the nice spring day, and they're sunbathing, but as I told you, nobody swims because the water is still very cold, and it's not really comfortable to swim in this part of the Neva River right in the middle of the city. And to the left-hand side, there is a former Petrograd side of St. Petersburg. This is where the city was growing under the protection of Peter and Paul fortress. As I told you, this is where the place was being built during the times of Peter the Great, in the beginning of the 18th century. This is where the first church was built. This is where the first Gostiny Dvor, or like shopping mall, appeared. This is where they had the first market, and the first houses were built here too. All houses were carried out in wood, and none of them survived until present times except an old house of Peter the Great, a log cabin of Peter the Great. It's nearby this place. And to the left-hand side you can see the Holy Trinity Bridge. The Holy Trinity Bridge was built by 1906. They wanted to finish this bridge by 1903, but they were a little bit delayed with the project, and the bridge was open only by 1906, while it was still the Russian Empire. And this bridge was built especially to 200th anniversary of St. Petersburg, because you remember that St. Petersburg was founded in 1703. This is a French project, so the company, French company Batignolles, was responsible for building this bridge. And originally another company was supposed to build it, where Eiffel was the main engineer, the same guy who created Eiffel Tower. But later another company finished the project. But some people still think that it was designed by Eiffel Company, but it's not true. It was another French company. And as you know, in Paris there is a bridge that was named after the Russian Tsar, Alexander III. So Alexander III Bridge, the Russian bridge in Paris, and the French bridge in St. Petersburg. And to the right-hand side you can see one of the magnificent palaces in St. Petersburg. It's called Marble Palace. You can see all those vases on the top of the roof. And the Marble Palace was given by Catherine the Great to her favorite, Count Gregory Orlov, for his assistance in coup d'etat. And Gregory Orlov never moved into the palace because it took 20 years to build it. So when the palace was finished, Orlov died. And later Catherine the Great bought this palace from his relatives, and it belonged to the Romanovs dynasty. And the last owner of this marble palace was Konstantin Romanov, who was also famous as the poet. And his pseudonym was K.R., so Konstantin Romanov. And this marble palace is called like that because the interiors of the marble palace are decorated with 32 different colors of kinds of marble. We just passed under the Holy Trinity Bridge. It's another drawbridge. It opens at the time of navigation. And to the right-hand side, you can see the Academy of Culture. Nowadays it's an Academy of Culture. And next to it we see the Summer Garden. The Summer Garden is situated on the island. It's hard to imagine because we just see the summer garden on the other side of the bank of the Neva River, but from all sides it's surrounded with water, with canals. And to the right-hand side there is so-called Swan Canal. Apparently there are swans there, but I've never seen any. And to the different side there is a Fontanka River, and from the other side there is a Moika River. We will see the summer garden also from the other side. I just wanted to pay your attention that originally the summer garden looked different. It was the French regular garden with trimmed trees, straight avenues, fountains, because French regular gardens were very popular in the 18th century. But later, when English landscape gardens came into fashion, they stopped trimming trees, let them grow wild, and now it looks more like an English park. 10 years ago, they had a reconstruction of this garden, and the fountains from the times of Peter the Great appeared here. We didn't even know that in Peter's times there were so beautiful fountains. Now we can see them. The reason that we didn't know about that in 1777, really a long time ago, there was a terrible flood in St. Petersburg, and lots of fountains in the summer garden were destroyed. And since then they were never restored. And now we have several fountains in the summer garden, and it's one of the most beautiful gardens in the city center, and it's really nice to enjoy the atmosphere of nature. You know, this is like the only green oasis in the middle of the city, because St. Petersburg really lacks parks. We don't have so many parks here. It's famous with its historical monuments, you know, culture, but not so much nature, as I think. But this is a lovely garden. And to the opposite side from the summer garden, on the opposite side of the Neva River, we can see another small garden, and right in the middle of that garden there is a house of Peter the Great, so-called log cabin of Peter. And Peter lived there for 3 years, watching the construction of St. Petersburg. This log cabin was built within several days by soldiers. And Peter was a very simple guy. He didn't need much luxury, not like his daughter Elizabeth, who loved palaces. He didn't have this inferiority complex, so he loved just simple life, and he lived in this log cabin for 3 years. There are just 3 rooms inside. And later in the 19th century, they decided to protect this log cabin with a red brick building around it, so it would protect it from floods, because St. Petersburg suffered floods very, very often until they built the dam 40 years ago. And one of the worst floods of St. Petersburg was in 1824, and this flood was even described in the poem written by Alexander Pushkin, The Bronze Horseman. And another flood that was described in poems by Anna Akhmatova in 1924. You know, there was a different flood too. And to the left-hand side, you see this blue and white building. It's Nahimov School. It's a cadet school for young sailors. And boys in the age of 12 can enter the school, and they study until the age of 18. And later, if they want to continue their military education, marine education, they can go to military academy, Marine Military Academy to be exact. And next to this Nahimov school, there is a Crows Aurora, legendary Crows Aurora. And this Crows Aurora took part in several wars and several battles, but it's famous with the Russian-Japanese War because it took part in Tsushima battle. It's an episode of the Russian-Japanese War, and lots of ships got drowned, but Aurora, Diana and Pallada, they survived miraculously. And later Aurora was restored and took part in the First World War and later in the Revolution. The thing is that the crew of the Crows Aurora took the side of Bolsheviks, the side of revolutionaries. And the cruiser started the revolution. It made its famous blank shot as a signal for storming the Winter Palace. And from here we can see the gun of the Crows Aurora that made its blank shot. It was done in 9:45 in the evening, and Aurora at that time wasn't here. It was nearby Nikolaevsky Bridge. It wasn't seen from the Winter Palace, but everybody could hear the shot of Crows Aurora. And it made its shot on the 25th of October of 1917, and afterwards the Winter Palace was occupied by Bolsheviks, and the ministers of the provisional government were arrested and taken to the political prison. Later most of them were released, and some of them immigrated and never came back. So you can see the Crows Aurora here. Now it's a museum, and it's very popular among the visitors of St. Petersburg and also our citizens. Recently it was restored inside out, and it became even more interesting. But it's a steamboat, as you understand. It's really old. It was launched on water in 1900, so it can't move without help nowadays. But if you use it as a steamboat, so it definitely can move. And to the opposite side of the Crows Aurora, you can see the Hotel St. Petersburg, the former Hotel Leningrad. It's this typical Soviet architecture. And next to it, the long, monotonous building in yellow color, it's the military hospital. And nearby there is a Foundry Bridge. Foundry Bridge is also a drawbridge, and it gets open at night. And now we are approaching the Fontanka River and the Summer Garden, and to the left-hand side from here we see Kutuzov embankment, but a long time ago it was called French embankment because there was a French embassy there. You remember that for many years, for more than 200 years, St. Petersburg was the capital city, and only after the revolution in 1918 it became the second capital of Russia, because the main capital now is Moscow. But I just wanted to say that all embassies originally were here, and because of the French embassy, that part of the city was called French side, and French people lived there. And in the times of Peter the Great, there were lots of foreigners in St. Petersburg. Germans lived here, Englishmen lived here, Frenchmen lived here, And it was pretty common because Peter wanted foreign architects build his city, because Peter was really obsessed with European culture. He loved it so much, and he wanted his city, St. Petersburg, look like a European city, like one of the European capitals. And this is why so many foreign architects took part in the construction of our city, like Domenico Trezzini, Francesco Rostrelli, Auguste Montferrand, and so many. And also talented Russian guys were sent to Europe, so they would study there and were able to construct buildings here like foreigners do. And I would say that it's true that our city has a very strong European look comparatively to other Russian cities. For example, Moscow looks pretty Russian, and other, especially provincial towns in Russia, look very, very Russian, with all those churches with onion domes. But St. Petersburg looks pretty European due to the idea of Peter the Great, who created this city as a European capital, and he really enjoyed the European culture. And we are approaching another palace of Peter the Great. It's so-called Summer Palace of Peter. To the right-hand side, right in the corner of the Summer Garden, there is a simple building, just two-story building. It's the Summer Palace of Peter the Great. And we are now in the Fontanka River, and to the right hand side you can see the Summer Palace of Peter the Great. You remember that for several years Peter lived in a log cabin, and later when this palace was built, he moved here with his family. Peter lived on the ground floor, and on the first floor his wife with his children lived. And Peter's second wife was a very simple woman, so she liked cooking and she was baking, and Peter really enjoyed her pastries and her bakery. And right now the summer garden is open for public. Everybody can come here and enjoy it. And apart the palace of Peter the Great, here we see two pavilions. This is the tea pavilion, and another pavilion is a coffee pavilion. A long time ago in these pavilions they were serving for visitors tea or coffee, and so smells wouldn't mix up. They served them in separate buildings. And to the left hand side we see the yellow building with a dome. Now it's a court, one of the courts of St. Petersburg, but a long time ago it was the law school, and one of the students of that law school was Peter Tchaikovsky. Everybody knows that Peter Tchaikovsky is the famous Russian composer who composed music for Sleeping Beauty, for Nutcracker, but I would say that nobody knows that Tchaikovsky started to become a lawyer. But his parents wanted his their son to get the serious profession, so Tchaikovsky was sent to the law school, and he planned to be a lawyer, but he happened to be the famous composer. And to the left-hand side there is a part of the so-called salty town, Salt Town. This house was used for as a warehouse for salt and wine a long time ago. Right now in this place there is an art school named after Stiglitz, and this part of the city is really artistic. And now we are approaching to one of the most interesting parts of the city. So here we can see the Michael's Castle. So here we can see the Michael's castle. We have lots of palaces in St. Petersburg, but only one castle. This is the castle where Paul I lived. Paul didn't want to stay in the Winter Palace, the residence of all Russian Tsars. He wanted to live in a separate residence, and this residence was built for Paul by the architect Brenna, Vincenzo Brenna, another foreigner, and it looked like a medieval castle. It was surrounded with moats, it had drawbridges over the moats, and no enemy could get into the castle. And in this castle Paul felt really safe. Paul lived in a constant fear of coup d'etat. He was afraid that one day he would be assassinated like his father, Peter III. But unfortunately, 40 days after he moved into the palace, he got into the he was assassinated, and he was assassinated by the court people, and it happened really as a shock for the Empress, for the wife of Paul I. And after the death of Paul, his son Alexander became the ruler of Russia. And later, this castle was turned into the military school, and one of the students of that military school was Fyodor Dostoevsky, who wanted to get the profession of military engineer, but later he became a famous Russian writer. And to the left-hand side you can see a nice Michael's garden, and in the background we can see Michael's palace. It was originally built for the youngest son of Paul I, Michael, and Michael lived there with his wife. Later, after the death of them, in the end of the 19th century, by the order of Alexander III, that palace was turned into the Russian Museum, the Museum of Russian Art, where we have a great collection of paintings by Russian artists and a wonderful collection of icons. To the right-hand side, there is a field of Mars, and originally that was the field used for military parades, later for some festivities. Now there is a common grave of the victims of the February Revolution there, and eternal flame in the middle of this common grave. And to the left-hand side we can see the multicolored domes of one of the most beautiful church of St. Petersburg, Church of Holy Savior on Spilt blood. And this church reminds us of ancient Russian churches built in the 16th century, for example. It reminds us of St. Basil's Cathedral on the Red Square in Moscow. But this church originally was built in 1907, so it was a 20th century church. Can you imagine? But it looks so old. It was just the style, pseudo-Russian style, that was very popular at that time. And this church marks the place where Alexander II was assassinated. Alexander II, being the Tsar reformer who abolished serfdom in Russia, was still very unpopular Tsar, and he was chased by terrorists almost. 7 assassinations were arranged on him, and the last one, unfortunately, was successful. And after the Tsar was killed, his son Alexander, who later became the Tsar Alexander III, decided to create the church on the place where his father was killed. And now we are on the Moika River, one of the nicest rivers in St. Petersburg, and it's a very calm place of the city. And to the right-hand side, all those former mansions of nobility you can see to the right-hand side, and these green buildings with white pilasters. Pilasters are flat columns, as you know. And this is so-called the last palace because it was really the last palace built before the October Revolution. It was built in 1916. In 1917, the October Revolution took place in St. Petersburg, and no more palaces were built because it was the end of the Russian Empire. And this is also the end of our lovely tour. I hope it was really enjoyable for you, and it's much nicer to come to St. Petersburg and see the city from water, to enjoy the atmosphere of the northern Venice, and to feel the part of this lovely city. Thank you very much.